Hello and welcome to the Irish Angle on our Jump to It show. As usual, I have Johnny Ward and Emma Nagle with me, and we're going to have a look back at all the different things that happened last week, particularly the racing. Johnny, Emma, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Vinny.
Thanks, Vincent.
Now, I don't know where to start off here. There's loads of stuff. I suppose we start off with some of the racing first off. One little aside from me is a horse won yesterday called Cosmic Vega in Nice, which is the first winner for the new Cunningham Lodge partnership of Mick Halford and Tracy Collins. Great for them to start off, but I must say, just this is a little aside from me being a website editor, that it's a nuisance. That's what it is. These dual trainers. What do you do with their stats? What do you do with their records? Everything about it. It's a messy situation. It also takes up a lot of type space for our race cards. Is when you have Michael Halford, Tracy Collins in brackets, Cunningham Lodge partnership. It's too much anyway. Good luck to them in their new venture. That's the first thing. Right, we move on to the proper racing. France at the weekend, I suppose, would be first point of call. We thought there was going to be an Irish winner of the French champion hurdle. There wasn't. No Irish horse in the first two. Same with the Grand Steeplechase de Paris. Did you watch those, Emma?
Yeah, no, it was good racing. Firstly, in the French champion hurdle, we probably looked like we might dominate that one. There was a lot of good horses went over. I thought Classical Dream and in particular Uwick ran massive races. Like I think Uwick picked up nearly 30 grand for finishing fourth, and you know he's having a good time of it. But the French horses came out on top in there and in the Grand Steeplechase. It's kind of a question, I suppose, if you're targeting a horse at it. I think our horses are going over there after a long hard season. It's kind of nearly an afterthought for a lot of them. Whereas the French horses, obviously, they're highlight of their year, maybe unless they have gone to England, but most of them probably wouldn't have. So it's kind of hard for our horses to go over and to compete against the best in France after kind of a long hard campaign. I thought Franco de Port went well, but again, he's had plenty done at this stage, so probably no massive shock to see the French come out on top. But like in fairness to Gala Marceau, then she won the 4-year-old hurdle super impressively, and even despite she has been everywhere this year and ran her race nearly every time. So yeah, she was super impressive, and maybe she might improve next year again to be a good contender for the Mayor's Hurdle. You wouldn't know.
Yeah, she was very impressive. Danny Mullins rode her as well, which was interesting too, isn't it? He's ridden her every time, as far as I know. Johnny, what did you make of it? I know that Franco de Port. I know Emma's saying that the Irish horses had a long season, but Franco de Port, according to Willie Mullins, since the horse finished third in the race last year, the whole season was geared around having another go at that. One of the big races in the National Hunt calendar, I suppose, that he has never won. So what did you think of those?
Yeah, it's a race. Ireland actually has an abysmal record in it, and I was at a couple of race meetings over the last sort of week and a half, and there was an awful lot of build-up from people about O'Toy because Ireland had 7 runners in the race on the Saturday, and I suppose just on that race, it's interesting that you see Hewick and Fernilly, who effectively have been campaigned in the main over fences this season, going back over hurdles and running so well, and maybe trainers going forward will look at the campaigning of Fernilly this year and maybe think to sort of place their horses as best in terms of prize money. The winner of the race, who was sent off a short price favourite, very, very interesting horse I didn't know much about, Talim, by Sidestep, who's, you might know, Sidestep's the stallion of, I think the best horse in these parts is Real Appeal, and Sidestep, to have a horse who stays so well over hurdles is interesting, and he's only a 6-year-old, so it'll be lovely to see a horse like that be targeted at the Stayers Hurdle in Cheltenham, because I think that's a race, if you think of the likes of Barracuda, it'd be fantastic to have another good French horse in it, and to have it, I suppose, restored to where it was in terms of the past, and have more French runners at Cheltenham. I think in the big one itself, then it looked like the Irish really didn't have any sort of main excuses, but it was a brilliant way to end the season. Danny Mullins kind of called it the end of the season in terms of Gala Marceau, and she looks very good going forward. But I thought it was compelling stuff, all the Irish going over there. I think by all accounts, they had a good weekend in Paris, so also went over as well.
It wasn't a bad week
Sorry, Em.
Sorry, I just forgot to mention it wasn't a bad week for a bad race for Irish sires either. Zambezi's son is actually standing down in Fermoy now. He sired the winner of the big race, Grand Steeplechase de Paris. So I'm sure they're all happy down there. He's only a 6-year-old, so not a bit of an Irish connection, I suppose. We didn't do too badly.
But just overall with this, right? You know the way we talk about Cheltenham, it's the World Championships of National Hunt Racing and everything else. Are we a bit like the Americans with their World Series in baseball? That we've got a World Championships in Cheltenham, and yet all the best horses obviously aren't there. When you look at the French champion hurdle and the Grand Steeplechase de Paris, how many good ones have they got over there that could compete in Cheltenham, as you say, with the likes of Barracuda from years ago? How do we get the French horses to go to Cheltenham? It'd be a much better festival, wouldn't it, if we had 20, 30 top French horses running there too? Is there any way of getting
Yeah,
them over, Johnny?
maybe we get Pat Keogh to become manager of Cheltenham. And Pat, of course, is famous for his jet setting. He used to try to book himself over to Japan, at least notionally anyway, to go over and get the Japanese horse over. But in fairness to Pat, he would try very, very hard when he was in charge of Leopardstown to get the Champion Stakes international as possible. And I think I think Cheltenham actually really should look into this. They should make a massive concerted effort going forward. When you see these very good French horses winning their home races, now I know the prize money in Cheltenham isn't amazing by French standards at all. But when you see the likes of Wesley Ward coming over to Royal Ascot and the prestige that Royal Ascot entails, I'm sure it's not as attractive for French trainers as you might think it is, because the prize money is what it is, and French prize money is very good. But it would really, really add to it. Like I'd much prefer. It's great. It's all well and good Ireland winning all these races and becoming the perennial winner of the Presbyterian Cup, but it'd be far better crack and far more interesting if you've the French coming over, and the French jockeys as well. Even the veteran who won the race at the weekend yesterday, the big race, he was criticised for his ride in the Stairs hurdle as well, and that's always another aspect of the meeting. And I think of Francois and Thierry Dumaine coming over and Barracuda, and that those memories stick in my head. It'd be great to have more French horses. Cheltenham really should, I think, make an effort for it.
I'd agree. All right, we'll have a look at the flat racing from last week, because we had some really good flat racing. The Lockhinge on Saturday, Modern Games and Chindit. That Modern Games is obviously a hell of a horse, right? 122. Second, or won the Breeders' Cup, was it? Second in the Breeders' Cup last year. Hell of a performance, considering that it was off the bridle from halfway. It looked to be going nowhere, and yet gets up to win. The second horse, Chindit, took a bite out of William Buick, trying to bite the horse, and bit his hand by mistake, I think. What do you make of that, Emma? High class racing?
Yeah, he was a very impressive winner, in fairness. Seems to have nearly improved again from his 3-year-old to 4-year-old season. Thought it was a very kind of taking performance. Chindit was a bit of a sore loser, right, taking a bit of a chunk out of him going past him at the line. Yeah, he looks kind of a fancied one now for Royal Ascot. I think he's heading for the Queen Anne. He's kind of vying for favouritism with Inspirit of John Gosden. So yeah, no, very taking performance. It's kind of hard to knock him too much. Yeah, I'm just looking forward to seeing one next time now, whether he can back it up. Kind of good place for him last year. Probably he bumped into Boyd and a few other good horses. But yeah, he might get his day in the sun as a 4-year-old this year. It might be his season of note.
Yeah, very good. And then the big meeting during the week was the Dante meeting at York, which was a hell of a meeting. And the Dante Stakes itself was a cracker. Johnny, you liked the Irish horse that ran in that, White Birch, previously. And you're not too far wrong, I'd say. Looks a Derby contender.
Yeah, and like we were just talking off air there, just about the race itself, and you were mentioning, Vinny, that its relevance in terms of the Derby might be a little bit questionable, because I think I think the Aidan O'Brien's horse that finished third in the race, as far as I know, isn't actually entered in the Derby. Would have to be supplemented. What's interesting as well in terms of Dante is that the horse that you mentioned of John Murphy's that was ran second, and Sir Michael Stout's horse, they're both by Ulysses, and Sir Michael Stout's horse was very, very eye-catching in the race. Now, the Derby picture itself is very smudged, I think. I spoke to Aidan O'Brien about something else, actually. I was actually talking for a piece I did in the Business Post about the HRI reports, and I asked him kind of casually about Augusta Rodin, and it is really striking how confident they are about this horse's ability and how readily forgiving they are in terms of the running the guineas. So I think it's a fascinating derby in many respects. You look at the likes of Alder as well, who was second at Chester for Donegal O'Brien. I spoke to him this morning. He's gone over for the race, all as well with him. But that Dante's well worth looking at again, Vinny. You mentioned Passenger. I thought he was very unlucky. He was well backed. He's obviously by Ulysses as well. And for John Murphy to have a horse, so White Birch really on another day could have won. For John Murphy to have a horse that now has a realistic chance of winning a classic is fantastic for racing, I think. But it's a really, really open derby at the moment. I wouldn't like to be nailing my colours necessarily to the mass. I think that the three horses I'd be looking at the moment are Augusta Rodin, purely because of Aidan's confidence, Passenger, and I do like Alder as well at the price. I thought he showed loads of ability despite not winning at Chester.
Yeah, very good. Okay, going to move on slightly to something different, a couple of different things. One of them is, Emma, you were pointing this out to me earlier today, that English trainer Martin Smith is talking about giving up the game, but he's talking about trainers maybe that there should be a limit on the number of horses they have. What do you make of it?
Yeah, I thought it was kind of a surprising kind of story during the week. Martin gave up training recently because he was because of financial. Well, it wasn't commercially viable, I think, was the reason for him stopping training, which, it's obviously happening to a lot of smaller trainers these days. But it's kind of surprising that he had the notion that, trainers should be limited to a certain number. I think it's kind of a very, very hard one to suggest because there's loads of different problems with it. Like, firstly, what number do you put on a yard? There's yards in England and Ireland training, probably anywhere up to 300 horses, if not more. So, where's the cutoff point? You say 100, 200? I mean, if it was 100, is it going to make much difference, really? The likes of Ballydoyle and Willie Mullins, they'll just have satellite yards doing the same thing, and they'll swap them in and out. It's not going to have an awful massive effect. They'll probably just cut out the lower level horses they have and keep the quality. So I don't think it's going to have too much. Well, maybe the lower grade races might be a bit more open, but to be honest, for me, it doesn't make much sense at all, because I think probably the biggest problem facing the small to medium sized trainers is probably staff. There's awful lot of trainers around the country. If they could get the quality of staff that maybe the likes of Willie Gordon and Henry would have, they'd have an awful lot more winners. So I think you kind of just suggested something about in the football there's a financial fair play kind of thing. Maybe it's something that's going to be very, very hard to implement in racing. Spending at the sales, I think it is an advantage. Obviously, it's a big advantage to trainers to have the money to spend at the sales, but paying 300,000, 400,000 for a horse doesn't guarantee the horse is going to be any good. There's a lot of shrewd men in racing who can buy the lower level in terms of price and bring them to the top. I was actually at Paddy Toomey's during the week, and he's kind of a pretty good example of that. He wouldn't have the budget of the likes of Coolmore or anyone else, but his stats last year were just absolutely incredible. And I think seeing lads like that who can basically start from the ground and go all the way up to the top of their game kind of disproves the point that trainers should be limited. But yeah, I'm probably rambling on about it now, but yeah, I don't agree with it. Basically, I don't think it would work, and I don't think it's ever going to come in.
I agree with you. I can't see it ever coming in. The other side of this is you'd have to compensate the bigger trainers, because they've put capital development into, building barns, all the different facilities they have there, gallops and everything else, and walkers and swimming pools and whatever else they put in. What are they supposed to do? Leave them all idle now because somebody thinks that everyone else should have a fair crack at the whip? I don't know. Look, it's the economic factors at play here as well. You talk about trainers going with big checkbooks to the sales, but oftentimes it's the owners going with the big checkbook to the sale, and they determine wherever they want to have their horse in training. That has to be their prerogative. You'd go mad if you went and bought one at the sales next week for $500,000 and were told you had to have it with X or Y trainer. You couldn't have it with Willie or Gordon or whoever it may be that you wanted to put it with. What do you think, Johnny? This will never come in, will it?
I don't know why this came into my head lately as well about trainers being restricted now in terms of runners, but I don't think it will come in. And in fairness, if you look at the flat scene in Ireland at the moment, it's really probably more sort of spread out in terms of the riches in group races as it ever has been. Aidan O'Brien is going through a relatively lean spell in terms of the Irish Guineas, and the British Classics haven't they don't look all that favourable to him this year in general either. Um, I don't really see this coming in. I think it's up to other trainers in the sense of the National Hunt Game in Ireland. It's up to other trainers to challenge Willie Mullins and to be the best that they can be and to take on Willie Mullins, because essentially you really shouldn't have any advantage over any other trainer if you have the proper gallops in. Like it's as long as you have the right facilities, you should be able to train every bit as well as anyone else. So, I do have sympathy for Martin. His stats weren't off the charts either, and it's next to impossible to make training pay at a small level in Britain. The costs are just off the charts. We might speak about the HRI report, but like we're in a situation in Ireland where half our prize money is funded by the government. That doesn't exist in Britain, and it's just very, very hard for the likes of him to compete.
Well, let's move on to that. The HRI report, which was they commissioned Deloitte to do a report for them. It was on the 2022 stats for the industry. And they did one previously in 2017, which was based on the 2016 stats for the industry. And there appears to be a case that they're saying that for every euro, this is one of the headline pieces of it is, every euro that the government puts into horse racing through their funding, that the economic impact is €35 back. So that's the headline figure. That's the one that'll be bandied about for the next 5 years, probably till Deloitte do another report. If that's the case, and we take it, look, I'm not 100% certain. I've written a blog about this week. Today I wrote a blog about this report, and I'm not 100% happy with a lot of the figures they use and how they come up with the different ways of working out what's what. But ultimately, let's take it. There is no doubt there is an economic impact of the money that the government puts in here, the 70 million every year, and whatever that multiple is, the ratio between that and what the industry brings around. Is there not a case at this stage? This has been going on for years. Is there not a case for saying if the industry is able to generate that much income out of it, that some of that income should be going directly back into funding the industry rather than having to get the government to give a handout every year? Like we look at the breeding industry is totally reliant on horse racing taking place. The sales companies are totally reliant as well. The feed companies. You've got all sorts of different people, including the bookmakers to whatever degree you can take it that betting on horse racing is a major part of their business too. So the only one we look at in general terms for the funding is that there's a link between the government funding and betting tax, and that they looked at Horse Racing Ireland had previously put a mechanism in place where they'd hoped that all the betting tax collected in Ireland would be going directly back into funding horse racing, which doesn't quite happen at the moment, but it's more or less based on that model. What do you think, Johnny? Is it time that the others started coughing up a few quid here, the profits out of all these other areas within the industry, and fund the thing itself and not look for government? Because as we know, it's fickle with the government. You're not sure how much you're going to get. We're not sure what government's going to be in next either. And we know that Sinn Féin is the most likely one at this minute in time, and they're not too keen on horse racing or subsidising it to the level it has been up to now.
Yeah, although I'm not really sure about that, Finney. I think Sinn Féin has basically, we saw the local elections in Northern Ireland at the last week. Sinn Féin is essentially at a career high in terms of its polling. It's going to could poll the guts of 35-40% at the next election because of the generally because of housing and other issues like that. But I think Sinn Féin is primarily a populist party, and I think its populism might prevent it from upsetting the horsey set, so to speak, and upsetting the proverbial apple cart. I don't think it'll actually make that much difference. Having said that, racing is still reliant on government support. We have this horse and greyhound fund that came in the guts of 2 decades ago now, rather, and it was Charlie McCreevy who was kind of at the head of that at the time. It's the system of funding racing and greyhound racing has changed a little bit since, but it does seem a little bit strange that we're so reliant on all this money from government, and there's massive pressure on other sports getting some of the betting money by extension, and I completely agree with that. We've spoken about that before. I mean, the HRI figures talk about bookmakers, and they talk about jobs that are created sort of as a consequence of the industry. But like ultimately, if Irish racing didn't exist, betting shops wouldn't suffer much at all, if at all. I spoke to a couple of people last week, one working for an online firm. Irish racing isn't really part of their model, and racing itself is becoming less and less of the pie. It's all, going towards football, in play betting, sports, and all of that. Even like one fella said to me who used to work in the industry, Lotto would be more of a loss to a betting shop than Irish racing. But the HRI is just very, very good at selling itself, and that Deloitte report. And remember, Deloitte used to be the auditors for the FAI as well, the old FAI. So it came up with this report, and anyone who should read your blog should probably read the last line. I'm sure you had a chuckle when you wrote it, but these reports commissioned by HRI, ultimately they do have one purpose.
Yeah. Emma, what do you think? You're an accountant by trade. You must know all about these figures. Do you think it is time, somewhere along the way, that the industry starts to fund itself? If we're told it's a €2.5 billion industry in Ireland, surely you can come up with 70 million somewhere out of all of that, or the guts of 70 million. It doesn't even have to come up with it all. Come up with 30, 40 million in funding for itself somehow to self-fund itself.
Yeah, I think with the way the world is going at the moment, horse racing is going to have to prepare for it in the future. I don't think that this level of government funding can go on forever. And realistically, it shouldn't be too much of a problem for racing in Ireland to be able to cough up a fair amount of that money that's being put in by the government anyway. You'd think, like, looking at the amount of wealth in the sport, that it could be funded somehow. Like this, it's hard to see. There's a lot of groups now who are questioning the funding that racing gets. Look, and I do believe that it is such a big part of the economy in the country. It does deserve government funding, but I think it's fair to question the level of it for outside groups. It's a lot of public funds that go into the sport, and that's obviously makes the sport open to scrutiny. I think we do have to prepare for a different kind of future. We can't rely on the money continuously for the next decades. I don't think that's really practical to expect it. But I don't think it would be too much of a problem for racing. Obviously, we're in a very privileged position to be getting the funding, and it does help the sport grow and keep improving. But it's probably not something that's going to be a constant waterfall of money from the government, I'd say.
Fair enough. Okay, we'll go on to a slightly different topic, which isn't a particularly nice topic, but it's one that was in the news during the week. RTE went and looked for some information from Horse Racing Ireland around the number of horses who had died during racing over the last 10 years. It turns out that there's over 1,000, which is 100 odd a year. What's most interesting here around this is the fact that it turns out in the last 5 years, the percentage of fatalities per runner in Ireland is 0.3. In the UK, it's only 0.2. So it turns out that's a 40% higher incidence of fatalities per runner in Ireland than the UK. That's a huge difference, Johnny, isn't it? That's a worry for the industry and something that we really need to start looking at here.
Yeah, I read that this morning actually in the paper, Vinny, and I didn't really know what to make of it because I suppose the field sizes in Ireland are bigger, and I don't know. I mean, are our fences different over here? Why is this number is definitely interesting? It may be to do with field size, maybe to do with more casualties in big field races. I'm not entirely sure, but I do think that there's a difference in Ireland and Britain in terms of this. RT has looked into that report, into the figures, and that's grand. But there's an attitude there's a realistic sort of attitude among people over here to racing, and in general, the fact that horses who effectively are bred to jump and are bred to jump hurdles and fences at a high speed, there is going to be a fatality here or there. To me now, and you might disagree with me a little bit on this, Vinny. I really don't think this is that much of an issue. We should look at why the figures are higher than in Britain, but the figures themselves are relatively small. The elephant in the room here is what happens to horses after they finish racing, not what happens to them when they're running a race, in my view. Yeah,
you could well be right there. As I say, all I'm looking at here is the fact that why is there a difference between the two jurisdictions? The same horses run in both, and they transfer over every other day between ownership and running in different races and all the rest of it. So why are we at a situation here, which we seemingly are, where 40% more, now they're small numbers, but 40% more fatalities in Irish racing per runner now. Is it the ground? Is it our summer jump meetings? Is it the tracks that we're running on? Like, what is there's a problem here somewhere, and maybe I'm sure it's not one specific problem. It's not one issue that you can pinpoint and say that's what caused it. But somewhere in it, there needs to be a study done on this. Maybe we get Deloitte back in, do one on fatalities rather than economic impact, because long term for the sport, whatever about the economic impact of horse racing, there'll be no economic impact if the anti-horse racing lobbyists get their way in the end. And these are the sort of figures that we got to be able to say, hold on, and stand up clearly as an industry and say, this is why this happens, and we can justify that and that and that, and we understand exactly how it happens, and we're now 40% lower than the UK when it comes to fatalities. Let's hope that's the situation in a few years' time. What do you think, Emma?
Yeah, look, there's obviously a lot of variables involved. Our racing, as Johnny mentioned, is kind of a different style to the UK. Most of the fields would be an awful lot bigger. There's very, very few kind of small, especially in the lower grade races, I suppose. There's very few kind of small field runners races. It's definitely something, like, as Johnny mentioned, it's not like, I don't think it's a massive thing. Obviously, we're not doing as well as the UK, and I'm sure they will work on improving it. But I haven't looked at the stats in detail now, to be honest, but I think a lot of the tracks are improving on their. You sometimes, when you go racing during the summer, especially, I remember a few years ago, and you'd be going to the likes of Kilbeggan and other tracks, and you'd be kind of worried that there are tight tracks and the ground would be fast, and there would often be a fatality there. But now, I know when you go to Kilbeggan, it's going to be water pretty heavily, and it's an awful lot safer. You don't have the same kind of worries. Now, maybe there's more tracks that can improve on the same thing again. There's probably, they probably have to look at a track by track, really, to get a good perspective on it, because every track will have different issues, and maybe type of fences, type of hurdles, ground. There's an awful lot of things you have to look at. It's kind of just, I don't think there's any really easy answer to it, but I think overall it's probably not too big of a worry for the sport. Look, obviously no one likes to see fatalities in racing, but there is a certain amount of unavoidable risk involved as well. But I think they should definitely be working to get the numbers down, but I think there probably is bigger issues at play, as Johnny mentioned, like the aftercare of racehorses. I actually spoke to Trio Ella when I was at the National Stud during the week again, so if anyone wants to kind of hear about what they're doing, got a great kind of insight into their operations, and there's some great things going on within racing to improve, and I think probably keep going in the same respect. I don't think the sport's in too bad of shape. We're lucky here that there isn't as many naysayers to racing as there is in the UK for now, anyway, I suppose. But hopefully it'll stay that way.
Yeah, just one thing pops into my head there, just as you're talking around this, is the fact that we talk about summer jump racing must be some sort of a contributory factor to this, you would imagine. And our summer jump racing appears to nearly always take place on very tight tracks, doesn't it? The big tracks like your Leopardstowns, Punchestowns, Fairy Houses, they don't seem to race over the jumps during the summer. Just maybe it's a little thought that popped into my head. But anyway, we shall move on and finish up with a horse to follow from the week, something you saw that you think will win again. Emma, have you one for me?
If you're into kind of trainers' quotes and the confidence behind trainers, I think Aidan McGuinness is winner of the 2-year-old race in Mallow on Thursday. The name is just escaping me now. He beat a filly of Paddy Toomey's Jenny. It is, sorry now, I'm looking at the wrong day. If Johnny wants to go first there, I must just find the name. It's Bell something, right. I think.
Yeah, it's I've actually forgotten the name of that horse, William, but I spoke to one of the connections on afterwards, and he was raving about the horse as well. So Ado's I like the way Ado's strengthened his kind of stock in recent years. I'm going to go for a horse at a much more modest level. I was racing in Sligo on Tuesday. I put up a horse in one of the bigger races, Red Ball of Fire, who was an unlucky third in running. But the horse I'm going to give a second on the same night, Jackie Brown, trained by Harvey, Tony Martin. His horses are in really good form. She looks pretty modest, to be fair. I think it was the first time she actually finished placed, but I thought she was quite eye-catching. She was unlucky in the run, has had very little opportunities on nice ground, Jackie Brown, and I think she's definitely going to win a couple of races now in the near future.
Very good.
I got the
Emma,
name.
have you found
It's
your one?
Tiger Bell. Sorry.
Oh, Tiger
Yeah,
Bell.
Tiger Bell. I just was taken by the performance. I was that was actually the day I was at Paddy Toomey's, and he quite liked his filly Jenny as well. I think she was kind of quite a fancied favourite. But Aidan McGuinness just seemed so confident afterwards. He got her from the breeze ups I think a few weeks ago, and she looked very very professional, fast out the gates. And I think she's going to Ascot for the Queen Mary, and they're fancying her for that. So she looks like a kind of a real 2-year-old type. So I think she's probably going to be following.
Great stuff. Aidan McGuinness at Royal Ascot with 2-year-olds. Huh? Who'd have ever thought it? There you go. It's amazing how he's turned the corner. Talk about trainers and how they can compete. He was a small-time guy 5 years ago, and now he's flying, and he's lots of runners, and he's made some of those big handicaps in Galway his own over the last few years.
His
For
horse
me,
as well, Vinny, that won in that won the big race in Sligo. Was the big race the second big race? Whiskey on the Hill. Keep an eye out for him. He's by Ribchester, and he's the first time I remember Ado training winners was a horse called Victram, who was actually a dual coat horse. Now he wouldn't have that many dual purpose horse, but Victram was a very good horse at that level. And I think Whiskey on the Hill, I'm not going to say he's going to win the Triumph Hurdle, but I think he could be a very nice juvenile hurdler. I'm looking forward to seeing him in one of those races early on at Listowel or Roscommon when the 3-year-olds go over hurdles.
good stuff, yeah. Well, my horse to follow is the one we mentioned earlier from the Dante, Passenger, Sir Michael Stout. Finished third, in a dead heat for third with a horse called Continuous of Aidens, which, as you said previously, isn't entered in the Derby. But Passenger, this was some run. Very unlucky, cruising at all stages, couldn't get a clear run at it, and finished full of running. For me, that one question mark is, will the horse stay the trip in Epsom? I think it will. By Ulysses, which never ran over a mile and a half, as far as I know. Certainly didn't win over a mile and a half, Ulysses. But anyway, the other thing with Michael Stout is he's had 4 previous Derby winners, and 3 of them had the same route, went to this Dante. You had Desert Crown 2022, so he's gone for back-to-back Derby wins. Workforce 2010, Northlight 2004. So I think Passenger, it's got Derby written all over it for me. Anyway, I look forward to that. That's the 3rd of June, so not too far away. Okay, well, look, thanks for joining me. Thanks for all your insights about all the different subjects we covered this week. I know we were a bit rambling, but and thanks very much for everyone who watched. And make sure to subscribe to our channel, and hopefully we'll see you again next week. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.